What up, nerds? My name is Leslie Smith. Welcome to another weekly reading wrap-up here on the Nerdy Narrative. Now, if you're new and you're not sure what the weekly reading wrap-up is, it's where I'll just chat about all of the things that I've been reading this week, what I'm still working on, and what I plan to read next. Jumping right into what all I read. Well, let's start with the newest novella by Jim Butcher called The Law. This novella takes place almost right after the most recent book that was released called Battleground. I want to say there might be 1 to 6 months time that had passed. What I really enjoyed about this one, the author allowed Harry to grieve. As you can imagine from a book titled Battleground, there was a battle that happened, and of course there were casualties, and I like that he gave the character time to grieve. I also like how the character handled his grief. Harry's intelligent enough to know that he cannot let his grief just debilitate him. He has to keep moving forward. Every morning, he allows himself a couple of hours just to wallow in his grief and let it just wash over him. And when that time is up, he said, okay, it's done for today. Now I've got to keep going. And how does he do that? Taking a case. Now, the story itself didn't really do anything to blow my skirt up, but what I think the author did with this one was introduce a character that I think is going to be a heavy hitter in one of the 5 remaining books that we have coming in the Dresden Files series. I also want to mention that Jim Butcher himself narrated the audiobook, and he did a great job. I did not like the voice that he used for Bob. I just did not like it at all. I thought I was going to be upset because I'm one of those snobs that thinks that Marsters is Harry Dresden and no one else should narrate these books, but Jim did an amazing job, and I just thought it was interesting to hear the characters, perhaps how they sound in Jim Butcher's head when he's writing these novels. And then moving into my next completed read, I did finish The Warrior by Stephen Aryan. This is the second book in his Quest for Heroes duology, and I absolutely loved it. It was completely different from the first book, which is called The Coward. Completely different, but that is what I love in a series. Calcressia is back. He is now the king of Algany. One similarity the warrior has with the coward is Calcressia does go on a quest. Well, actually it's more of a mission. There is a purpose. The difference is this time it's not to save the 5 kingdoms, but to help a friend that he gave a promise to. You know, in The Coward, I was completely fascinated with Kel's character development and growth. In The Warrior, it was the characters around Kel that had me fascinated. And not just those characters, we get a new POV in this one when we get Queen Sigrid, Kel's wife. And the more that I read about her, the more I was convinced that the title referenced her. You guys will have to read it and tell me if you agree. I want to tell you, I think that The Warrior and The Coward, the title of these books could apply to multiple characters in each of the stories. If that was actually the author's intent, that was super clever, but that's just my personal take on that right now. I'll have to wait and get some opinions from some of you when you've read it. I've seen a lot of people reading The Coward or rereading The Coward lately, getting ready for the release of The Warrior, and I do have something special coming up in regards to this duology, so keep your eyes on the channel for that. Next is one that I wasn't sure about at first. The Last Smile in Sunder City by Luke Arnold. This was my patron pick of the month for July. This was picked by my patron Gail. It turned out that Gail also had this series, so we buddy read this one together and had a great time chatting with each other about it as we made our way through. This is an urban fantasy, and I was a little bit thrown off because while this world did have magic at one time, when we enter into the story, magic had been ripped away. And when I realized that at the beginning, I thought, there's not going to be any magic in this urban fantasy. Am I going to like this? And I also had this fear that I was going to keep comparing it to some of my other favorite urban fantasies, such as the Dresden File and Charlaine Harris's Gunny Rose series. From the start, it was a very easy, fast read, so I just kept going. And next thing I knew, I was really enjoying it. Because even though the magic is gone from this world, the creatures who had magic are still there. And so I got to see this world created by the author as to what possibly could happen to these magical beings when they no longer had magic. They didn't just die out. It was vampires no longer had to feed on blood to survive, but they were immortal. Elves aged, every single century they had been alive instantly. Of course, in that regard, if they had lived past their life expectancy, they just turned to ash and were gone. Sirens, banshees, wizards, witches, trolls, werewolves, all of these beings are still here, and we get to see what happens, how they're surviving in the aftermath of this world's magic being ripped away. It is very tragic. It's a sad tale, but it's so intriguing. Our main character is Fetch Phillips, who is a man for hire, and he has been hired by a school to locate a missing professor who just so happened used to be a vampire. Very early on, when I read that there had been magic and had been taken away, I wanted to know why. I wanted to know more about that story. Luckily for me, as I kept going, the author did find a way to give me that information in bits and pieces throughout the story that kept me happy. I really ended up enjoying the series. I also think one of the things that had me enjoying this one is I finally was reading an urban fantasy where the main character was just human. He had no magical ability whatsoever, and I don't believe any of my other urban fantasies have been just a human. Now, I do have the first book in Kevin Hearn's Iron Druid urban fantasy, as well as Benedict Jacka's Alex Versus, so I haven't read those to know if they might be similar to this one, but so far this is the only one I remember reading, and I really liked it. I believe the only other completed read that I've had since I talked to you guys last was Michael Pico's Corpse Honey, which is a collection of horror stories. I loved this collection. I believe there were 10 total stories plus a bonus one. There was one that was in there that I don't think it had a title. I don't remember if it was in the table of contents or not. It was one for those of you who are lovers of the Dark Tower. You're gonna love a couple of elements that were inspired by that series that, I just feel that I should say a huge thank you to any author I come across who writes something inspired by Stephen King's Dark Tower series, because it just reminds me of how much I love that series, and it takes me back, and it's just heartwarming because that is my #1 favorite series on this earth. If I was told I could only have one series to read and reread for the rest of my life, it would be The Dark Tower. That is a series that I believe is going to give me joy over and over, no matter how many times I read it. I love that friend group, that found family. It is absolutely the best one I have ever read. Now, of course, let me say and remind, these are all my personal opinions, completely subjective to this little girl right here. So I understand if some of you might not love The Dark Tower as much as me. You have your own favorite, but that's my favorite. So when I read that last story, I just was smiling the entire time. It was a horror story, but I was just so filled with love in my heart for those elements that reminded me of that series that I honestly couldn't really tell you much about that one. I would need to reread it, because every time I would read about this one particular thing, I would just sigh. But the collection was fantastic. I'm planning to do a dedicated review for that collection because I think it deserves one. It had such a varied range of horror subgenres in each of the stories, and the writing style was not the same for all of them. I will 100% be reading more from this author. And then the Stephen King short story read-along that is hosted by the Bookish Drummer. We started Nightmares and Dreamscapes. This sucker is a brick. This is a murder weapon. I did read the first story in here called Dolan's Cadillac. It's really more on its way of being a novella than a short story, and I loved it. And I hope that, like Skeleton Crew, where the first one was the novella The Mist, that just kind of set the tone and expectations for that collection, and I absolutely love that entire collection. I hope Dolan's Cadillac is the one that is setting the tone for this one, which means I will love this one just as well. But Dolan's Cadillac was some mobster stuff. It was so clever. It's a tale of revenge, and it's that methodical, well-planned, well-executed, just took their time to make sure every single detail was held under a microscope and examined. There was so much detail that I just wasn't expecting, that King just found ways to just work in. I just thought, man, that is so clever. It just makes you wonder if there was ever anybody in Stephen King's life that disappeared and no one ever found the body. Just the well-planned revenge in this one was very reminiscent to me of The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexander Dumas, and it really had me kind of think for a second, do I want to reread The Count of Monte Cristo? And I was like, nah, I got too many other books I need to read first. I also found my way back over to aminitale.com. I read episode 15, which was called Till the Bones. And it was the last part of the 5-part Spooky Line series that they did that year. I love the way that it tied in the previous 4 episodes. And it did it in such a way, because it's been a minute since I read the first 4. And so when I returned weeks later, the author did a great job of putting in just small reminders. They didn't go into great detail of rehashing something. So if you read them back to back, you wouldn't get annoyed by it, because it was just, okay, well, I just read these 4. I don't need to reread those 4 stories in this one. But it felt good to be back in this little cosmic fantasy with my favorite mouseling and the other agglomerates that he is cursed to blip through space and time with for what apparently is going to be eternity. I can't wait to see what his next adventure is, who he's going to save. Will it be a world? Will it be a village? Will it be just a group of nomadic creatures, or possibly an enemy that can just wipe them all out? Who knows? I can't wait to find out. So that will take care of everything that I have completed, all of the things that I read. I've actually already snuck into what I'm currently reading, because I mentioned Nightmares and Dreamscapes and A Mini Tale, which is an online cosmic fantasy series that you can read, and it is completely free. There's probably 35-40 episodes now. I'm only on 15, so I have a little bit of ways to go to catch up. The other collection that I am back into is Ronald McGilvery's Tales from the Parkland. As you can see now, I have a beautiful physical copy to show you guys. Look at this cover. Isn't that beautiful? The author was super generous enough to send me a copy. He noticed that I had started reading it on my Kindle and offered to send me a copy, and it was just too beautiful to pass up. And these are stories that I know I'm going to be rereading someday. But on the front here, I wanted to point out something. It says, stories for late at night. No. No, 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 don't read them at night. Out of the 5 I've read, there's maybe 1 that's okay to read at night. The rest, don't read at night. Don't do it. The one that I've read most recently that traumatized me is one called Squealer. And I thought, oh, this one might be a little ha-ha funny horror. No, 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 no. It starts out mundane enough. It's an argument between 15-year-old Carl and his 10-year-old sister Cheryl. The same old, I'm gonna tell mom if you sneak out unless you take me with you kind of stuff. We've all been there, those of us that have siblings. Of course, they're going to the creepy forest that's called the Mystery Forest. No big deal, right? They're scared of everything that moves and rustles. Even when things changed and it wasn't what I was expecting, and I thought, holy crap. Then I let my guard down, because I'm like, okay, well now I know what's really going on here. That was just Ronald McGilvery's right. He took a swing with his left and hit me with something else that changed the game, and I was just like, what? I'm so glad that I'm older, because if I was still a teenager that snuck off and would go with my friends and we would try to scare each other by going in creepy places, I wouldn't be able to sleep after reading that. So that will take care of all of the things that I read, the collections that I'm still working on. What am I going to read next? First up will be my SPFBO read, Eve of Snows by L. James Rice. Probably by the time this video goes up, I will already, hopefully, be deep off into it. And then after that, my next review read will be The Appetite Factory by John Gingrich. This one, as you can tell by the beautiful cover and the title, has to do with what you eat. I cannot wait to read this one. It's gonna be so good. An all too familiar dystopia where public perception precedes reality and our identities are defined by what we consume. For those of you who don't know, I love to eat. I am always eating, or I'm thinking about eating. So a book that has to do with eating, especially the things that they eat, I can't wait to read that one and tell you about it. 2 things have now happened. I've talked up these 2 new books that I want to start, so I'm excited to read. So I really want to get off here and go read. And now I've talked about food, so I feel like I need a snack. So guys, I am going to wrap this up here. I'm going to go get a snack, curl up with a book, get started so that I have something to tell you about next week. I hope you all have had a wonderful week. I hope you have a great weekend planned with lots of reading. Summerween has started today. So for those of you that are participating, I believe it is hosted by Gabby Reads and Olivia Reads a Latte. I'll put their 2 announcement videos down below, but Summerween starts today. It's for a week, Friday to Thursday. They have some cute prompts to have some fun with reading some horror stories or bringing Halloween to summer. So check that out if you want to participate. I'm going to try. We'll see. I have low expectations this will happen, but I'm going to try and read my book club pick, The Last Time I Lied by Riley Sager, over the course of those days and maybe do a vlog. We'll see. We'll have to wait and see. You know, it just depends on what mood I wake up in the morning. Thank you so much for being here and watching and supporting and just listen to me chat about the books that I read. I hope that I talked about something today that piqued your interest to see about picking it up. If you did, let me know what it was down in the comments or tell me something you're reading that you think I would be interested in. Have a fantastic rest of your day and I will catch you in the next one.